It's 1957. Sputnik 1 has successfully begun to orbit Earth. Albert Camus wins the Nobel Prize for Literature. In Manchester, two young musicians meet for the first time at the Woolton Parish Church fete, and one night, whilst appearing on a radio show, an ambitious young actor with a disdain for Hollywood and its studio system begins a chain of events which will forever change the course of cinema. Born in New York on December 29, 1929, to Greek immigrant parents, Cassavetes' early experiences shaped him into both an accomplished actor and eventually an industry-defining figure. Although being a bad student for most of his schooling, when he was 19, having been exposed to the performing arts through his mother's amateur theatre acting, he was accepted by the prestigious American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City. Here, Cassavetes found his passion for the arts and began to develop distinct ideas about performance and storytelling, which eventually would shape his groundbreaking work in independent film. But before we can continue with Cassavetes' story, it's important we define just what independent cinema really is. According to Jeff King, a definition of independent cinema can vary in both form and degree. The level of independence can change from film to film, but we can differentiate indies from classic Hollywood studio films by the following criteria. 1. Industrial location. 2. The kinds of formal/aesthetic strategies films adopt. And 3. Their relationship to the broader social, cultural, political, or ideological landscape. Between 1947 and 1957, Cassavetes slowly became a regular face on American televisions. Initially working in minor roles or as a body double, he eventually found success starring as jazz musician turned detective Johnny Staccato in the show of the same name. For Cassavetes, acting and performance were a great passion and something that for the rest of his life he would be dedicated to. In fact, it was through one of his popular acting classes that he had an idea for his first debut film, Shadows. As I said in the intro, in 1957, whilst being interviewed on the late-night radio show Night People, Cassavetes lamented his feelings towards the film industry and its studio system. For most of the 20th century, the studios had run a monopoly on films produced in the United States, having entire control of production and distribution of films. Cassavetes argued that it stifled creativity, leading to formulaic and predictable filmmaking, and when prodded by the host and influenced by some of his famous bravado, Cassavetes claimed that he could make a real film about real people doing real things for a fraction of the cost of a Hollywood production. Cassavetes proceeded to ask for donations from the listeners, resulting in around $2,000 being sent in, and further donations from stars such as William Wyler, Hedda Hopper, and Joshua Logan, bringing the total to around $20,000, a number he would personally match. Without knowing it, Cassavetes began a lifelong obsession which would entirely change his life and cinema forever. After 3 years, Shadows was released. The film flipped the standards laid out by Hollywood. The film was shot on a shoestring budget, produced independently, starring non-actors who improvised almost everything. It relied completely on realistic photography and art, whilst confronting themes that Hollywood would never dare to inspect. For all but Cassavetes, the success of Shadows was a shock, and although it did not make any money, it won the Critics' Choice Award at Venice and started an international cinema movement. Cassavetes had successfully beaten Hollywood, but without generating a profit, surely he couldn't keep this up. Let's fast forward a decade to 1968. Martin Luther King is assassinated, Nixon is president, the boys from the Woolton Parish Church release The White Album, and Cassavetes finishes his fourth film, Faces. According to Murphy, Cassavetes believed that Hollywood actors were limited due to an over-reliance on scripts, and thus, for Faces, he attempted to upend traditional notions of what constituted film acting. In order to accomplish this, a small team of friends, including his wife Gina Rowlands, were the main cast. It shot for a small budget, initially $10,000 before ballooning to $250,000 as more people supported the project. It was shot on high-contrast 16mm film, creating a documentary feel. Faces takes the realism of Shadows and produces incredible performances. By many critics, it is his first true masterpiece. Cassavetes seemed to have beat Hollywood again, but the film lost $240,000. Still, determined to make more films, Cassavetes continued to take well-paid and successful acting roles, working on major films such as Rosemary's Baby and even being Oscar-nominated for The Dirty Dozen. At this point, many in the film industry thought that Cassavetes was an actor with a filmmaking hobby, but to Cassavetes, he was a filmmaker who acted. It's important to mention briefly that Cassavetes did for a time attempt to work within the studio system. In the decade between Shadows and Faces, Cassavetes was under a 7-year contract with Paramount Pictures. During this, he directed A Child in Waiting and Too Late Blues. His experience was less than favourable, as directors in the studio system had to demonstrate their conformity and commitment to the studio's material concerns Cassavetes did not share. He would never work with studios again. This experience only galvanised his views to the shortcomings of studio cinema. Over the next 20 years, Cassavetes would direct another 8 feature films to varying degrees of success. All of these films fulfilled George King's aforementioned independent criteria. However, much of this work began to differ from his early work. He never directed a black and white film again. His pictures became entirely scripted. He did, however, allow improvisation. But the way the films were shot became considerably more polished. However, at all these films' core was a strong independence. One way in which Cassavetes took his drive for independence to another level was through the creation of his own distribution company called Faces Films, a decision that was at the time completely original and groundbreaking. According to King, through this creation, Cassavetes consolidated himself as a hero to later independence, in a move which would sustain the impact with which indie cinema was having. And there was more proof that his system was working. Other than overwhelming positive critical reception, his film and his stars were winning awards. Husbands was nominated for Best Screenplay at the Golden Globes. Both A Woman Under the Influence and Gloria saw Gina Rollins nominated for Best Actress at the Oscars. And many of his films took home Golden or Silver Bears along with other coveted festival awards. Whilst this success didn't translate to box office success, it did demonstrate that independent film was fundamentally challenging the dominance of Hollywood studio films. Cassavetes passed away in 1989 as one of the most revered figures in cinema history. Aptly titled the Godfather of Independent Cinema, Cassavetes' legacy lives on today. He and his work directly inspired a generation of filmmakers such as Jarmusch, Von Trier, Wong Kar-wai, Altman, Scorsese, and many, many more. For better or for worse, today the studio system is a shadow of its former self, and it is characters like Cassavetes who played a significant role in changing the landscape of the art form and democratizing filmmaking and distribution internationally.